The First Matebele War. In 1890, Cecil John Rhodes became the Premier of South Africa with the support of the Afrikaner Bond. Rhodes' grand imperial vision for a British Africa included Pan-African highway from the Cape to Cairo, stretching through the British colonies down to the length of the continent. To this end, he successfully acquired Bechuanaland and soon set his sights on Matebele land. In 1888, Cecil John Rhodes sent Reverend J.S. Moffat to Matebeleland to negotiate a treaty with Lobengula. Lobengula had witnessed the decimation of the Zulus by the superior firepower of British regulars in 1879 and hoped to steer clear of confrontations with Rhodes and the British. So in exchange for wealth and arms, he entered into a treaty with Moffat on 11 February 1888. The Rat concession followed on 30 October the same year, whereby Lobengula relinquished the mineral rights in his territory, granting sweeping commercial and legal rights to Rhodes. Through these agreements, Rhodes began gaining control of the territory, paving the way for the founding of the British South Africa Company, the BSAC, in 1889. Further hoping to expand their agricultural holdings, the British South Africa Company soon eyed things that were owned by the Ndebele people. The problem was, of course, that the Ndebele were not interested in giving up their prime cattle grazing areas. I mean, who would want to give up his stuff? In 1890, Rhodes sent a group of settlers known as the Pioneers Column into the Mashonaland, and when they reached the Harare Hill, they founded Fort Salisbury, now Harare. Greedily, Rhodes had been distributing land to the settlers even before the Royal Charter, but the Charter legitimized his further actions with the British government. By 1891, an order in council declared Matebeleland, Mashonaland, and Bechuanaland a British protectorate. In 1893, there were some Mashona cattle thieves who rustled a herd of cattle which belonged to the Amandebele, and then they sought refuge within the walls of the British Fort Victoria. Reacting, a large Ndebele raiding party attacked the Mashonas, massacring as many as 400 before the eyes of horrified white residents. With the cover of a legal mandate, Rhodes used this brutal attack by the Ndebele as a pretense for attacking the kingdom of Lobengula. Rhodes' right-hand man and British administrator Leander Starr Jameson set up the 1893 campaign. 3 British columns met near Iron Mine Hill and headed in southwesterly direction towards the Bulawayo under the overall command of Patrick Forbes. Their objective was to overcome the power of the Matebele under Lobengula and annexed Matebeleland to the BSAC territory. At first, Lobengula's warriors did not want to attack, possibly due to the smallpox outbreak that scourged Lobengula's camp. But on 25 October, as the British forces crossed the Shangani River and set up their laager, approximately 6,000 Matebele warriors attacked. Hundreds of the Amandebele died under the flaming muzzles of the Martini Henry rifles and Maxim machine guns, and the Amandebele were forced to retreat. Fewer than 10 members of Jameson's column were killed or wounded. The British continued to make their way to Bulawayo. However, they were initially thwarted by a frontal attack by a better organized and decisive Matebele force at Bambesi on 1 November. This was the first decisive battle of the 1893 Matebele War. The frontal assault demonstrated the courage of the Matebele, and the Matebele forces was large, 80,000 spearmen and 20,000 riflemen against fewer than 700 soldiers of the British South Africa Police. But in the end, the Amandebele warriors were no match against the British Maxim guns. King Lobengula fled after the defeat at Bambesi, but not before burning his capital of Bulawayo to the ground rather than allow it to be captured by the British. On 4 November, the British captured the smoldering ruins of Bulawayo. A detachment of troops under Major Alan Wilson were sent to pursue Lobengula. They followed him across the Shangani River on 4 December, but they were cut off by the King's Amabuto. Efforts by Commanding Officer Forbes' column to reinforce the patrol were too little and too late. The ensuing battle and eventual loss of 34 white soldiers became known simply as the Shangani Patrol. However, by this stage, the Ndebele had lost. Under somewhat mysterious circumstances, King Lobengula died in January 1894, and within a few short months, the British South Africa Company controlled most of the Matebele land, and white settlers continued to arrive. Some sources say that Lobengula had been suffering from smallpox and took poison with his chief counselor. He was buried sitting in a cave wrapped in a black ox skin. The 1893 campaign had been successful for Rhodes and the British South Africa Company. Ndebele cattle were considered loot and were divided among Jameson's volunteers. Each trooper had been promised 6,000 acres of land. By 1894, more than 10,000 square miles had been docketed for farmland. Lobengula's royal village of Bulawayo grew almost overnight into a European-styled city. The Pioneers Column. Cecil John Rhodes was anxious to occupy the territories of the Mashonaland and Matebele land in southern Rhodesia before the Germans, Portuguese and Boers could get to it. To accomplish this, Rhodes and his British South Africa Company raised a pioneer column. Rhodes approached the Matebele king Lobengula and persuaded him to sign a treaty in 1888. This treaty gave Rhodes full rights to mining and administration throughout the area of Mashonaland using this right concession. Rhodes approached the British government for a charter which would allow him to occupy the territory. The British South African Company was granted the right to form an armed body of men to protect the pioneer column as they travelled across Africa. Cecil John Rhodes' military advisors were wary of how Lobengula would react when he realized that Rhodes intended not only to mine but to occupy the land that he had granted. The military advisors were almost certain that war would break out and estimated that it would take 2,500 men and approximately £1 million to accomplish their goals. A young adventurer by the name Frank Johnson wasn't nearly so cautious. However, he proposed to deliver the territory within 9 months for no more than £87,500 and with a mere 250 men. Johnson's recruited Frederick Selous, a hunter with an excellent knowledge of the region, to act as the column guide. He began recruiting men of the expedition by offering each volunteer 15 mining claims and 3,000 acres of land in the newly claimed territories. They received thousands of eager applicants. However, Rhodes cleverly selected sons from rich families. He predicted that if the column was indeed attacked and in danger, the wealthy families would be more successful in enlisting help from British government. The pioneer column was placed under the command of Irishman Lieutenant Colonel Edward Penfather, an officer of the 6th Inskilling Dragoons. The initial column was made up of 180 colonists, 200 volunteers and 62 wagons. Another group soon attached themselves to the column, adding 110 men, 16 wagons, 130 horses, 250 cattle. They set out from Maklauzi on June 28, 1890 and arrived on September 12th at a flat marshy meadow protected by the steep rocky hills. The British flag was hoisted over the plain the following day and settlement began. 3 towns were founded nearby: Fort Victoria, now named Masvingo, Fort Charter and Fort Salisbury. The Pioneer Corps was disbanded and each of the members was given the promised lands on which they could begin farming.